Please welcome Jo Glanville and Malu Halasa.
Delighted to be here for the Shubbak Festival today with the novelist and journalist Malu Halasa. I'm a journalist and also very proud to be a trustee of Shubbak. So I'd just like to introduce Malu first, and then we're going to talk about her book. She's going to do a short reading. Because it's just half an hour, we may not have time for questions, but if there is time, then I'll hope we can give you a chance to ask a couple of short questions. So, an introduction from Malu, first of all. So Malu's a journalist, she's an editor and writer, and she's been described as one of the most original writers and editors on the Middle East. She actually started out as a music journalist, and she was one of the first to write about hip-hop in the British press. Over the past 20 years, she's been an astute cultural commentator on the Middle East, editing anthologies on Iran, Syria, and Lebanon that showcase the very dynamic culture of the region. Syria Speaks, to give you just one example of her books, was published in 2014, and it revealed the really astonishing explosion of creative expression in Syria after the uprising in 2011. Then there was The Secret Life of Syrian Lingerie, which came out in 2008, which overturned any preconceptions about women and sex with its exploration of the gloriously kitsch lingerie industry in Syria. Malu's acclaimed first novel, Mother of All Pigs, was published in 2017, and the New York Times compared it to Naguib Mahfouz's Cairo trilogy. It tells the story of a Christian family in Jordan. It's set during the present day, with the Syrian crisis on the doorstep. At the centre of the novel is a pig and a pig butcher, who outrages his Muslim neighbours with his thriving business of ham and sausages. The book is, as you might have already gathered, funny. It's also very tragic, and it's a very profound reflection on the state of the Middle East today. So please welcome Malu Halasa.
Thank you, Jo. Thank you.
So Malu, you grew up in Ohio in America. Your father's Jordanian. Your mother's Filipina. I want to ask you first, can you pinpoint a moment in your professional life as a journalist when you decided to turn your focus to the Middle East?
That's a very interesting question. I think it was really at my first job. I was really low at the bottom of the totem pole at Rolling Stone. And one of my first jobs is I was a fact checker. So I was really going through stories that people were writing, and I had to verify the facts. And I didn't think that, I was a young person at that time, so I didn't think that those stories would be as interesting as the stories or what I was interested in, which was the Middle East. But this was the 1970s New York. And in New York in the 1970s, really the Middle East was pretty much Israel-Palestine, or Israel. And nobody really wanted to know about the Middle East. So it was really at Rolling Stone I thought, well, I really want to write about the Middle East. I really want to look at it, because no one around me was interested in doing that.
But was there a particular moment that you can remember that when you wrote your first piece, or you began to identify yourself as a writer focusing on that region? I can't really think of that moment. I knew that it was always very difficult to place the stories I wanted to write about the Middle East. I think I had more of an epiphany when I was going to do fiction writing, and I wanted to place that in the Middle East than any of the political work that I did. How was that? How was fiction an epiphany?
It was. I was on my first big journalistic story in 1979. I'd taken a sabbatical from Rolling Stone, and I said, "Well, I want to go find Yasser Arafat during the Civil War, and I was getting closer and closer, and I had to go over borders without visas, and I was very nervous. I was young. But also, this family drama was being played out in front of me in Jordan, and I remember looking at my uncle's house thinking, if I ever write a novel, and that's what I had always wanted to do since I was quite young, thinking of myself, how I wanted to be, what kind of writer I wanted to be, is I thought, oh, this is where it will be set. It will be here, because everything's here, the past, the present, this kind of terrible future that I could feel.
So you now have to tell everybody, did you find Yasser Arafat?
Yes, I did. I did find Yasser Arafat, and he wouldn't talk to me right away, even though I had come through family connections. He made me wait. So I lived with a Palestinian family in Beirut, and they made me obsess about water. My experience with them made me obsess about water. And then I lived with guerrillas in Damascus, and that made me worry about the future for young men in the region.
That's a whole other story, which you have written about.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Now, there is a character in the novel called Muna who bears a very striking resemblance to you in that she's American, she's Jordanian, and she's Filipina. And there is a moment where she says, and one of the sort of big stories, interesting themes of the novel is women in the Middle East. There are many different kinds of women. There's Muna, who's got much more freedom than her family that she's visiting in Jordan. There's Samira, who's sort of breaking out, really. She's unmarried. She becomes involved with Syrian activists. There's Fatma, who's the matriarch, who's had to bring up 13 children. So we see many different kinds of women. And there is this moment when Muna says, when she's finding herself in this difficult position as this American who's come with inappropriate clothing, slightly scandalizing her relatives. But there's this moment where she says, I'm not a stranger. This is the face of the modern Middle East, mixed on the outside and the inside. I'm the Arab who would rather be a daughter than a son. I refuse to be sacrificed on the altar of the family. I am the liberator of myself.
Yes, in that way, yes, Muna is very much, those words are directly my words,
Okay.
not just because I wrote them. But I was in Jerusalem, and someone suggested that I wasn't Arab.
That you weren't Arab?
I was not Arab. And I took that as a great affront at that time. So in many ways, Muna, yes, reflects some of my experiences in the Middle East, how for a long time someone who was mixed, I wasn't really considered, I wasn't Arab, or I wasn't a part of the culture somehow. I was just something that happened, it was like a fling that happened abroad, and that I didn't have those deep family ties or linguistic ties that I have to the culture. But Muna herself, it was not based on me. I wouldn't wear inappropriate, I guess when I was younger, I did wear inappropriate clothing in the Middle East, and my cousins still do to this day. However, it's that character is more based on, for example, my 24-year-old sister, who's a millennial.
Okay, so it is. I mean, it's interesting because you as a writer, you explore. It's your roots in Jordan. It's that is part of your exploration. Some of what you've written as a journalist has been looking into the incredible sort of family, political stories that there are. But there's this very uncomfortable moment in the novel when Fatma, the matriarch, when Muna turns up, says, like Chinese, when she turns up. And so there is this, there are these very interesting parallel stories. There's a whole kind of identity liberation crisis of the women, but there's this other kind of identity crisis happening for Muna, isn't there?
And I guess it's really about trying to figure out where she fits in terms of, do you have to be this like thoroughbred Arab, or actually can you be a citizen of the world and also be Middle Eastern and to be Arab? And that you don't have to look like everybody else. I mean, the Halasas, my family, it's one of the largest Christian tribes in Jordan. When I was growing up, my father said we had 10,000 members. I mean, now we should have double that amount, you know? And there's a lot of intermarriage of cousins. And my father was the first one to marry outside his clan, and that caused a lot of problems. So, It was very interesting. I always go back to the story about my father tells about he was looking at my mother and I when I was very small, and he said to himself, they won't survive in the Middle East. They're too different. And so that was something that that's always something that I've been thinking about my own personal Arabness. Like, what's the quotient? I don't look this, you know. What's the quotient? How do I fit in?
So did he obviously said that to you, that he felt it wasn't safe?
Yeah, it wasn't safe. And also there were all these other pressures. My father was he was a well-known industrial chemist. So was he going to go move us to Saudi Arabia so he could take care of and pay for the rest of his very extended family living in Jordan, in a country that had, you know, economic difficulties?
Okay, I'd like to ask you to read an excerpt from your book. And this is, I think, one of the most moving passages from the book, which we'll talk about afterwards. And perhaps, Malu, you could give us a little bit of the context of where this comes in the novel.
It comes pretty much, I guess, towards the almost middle of the novel. The title is Mother of All Pigs, and yet for the first half of the novel, pretty much, you don't hear from the main character, one of the main characters, which is a non-human. And I'll read now. Roughly handled and trussed up, the tiniest exertion on her part, even a breath, nearly suffocates. Flat on her back, she's engulfed again, her engorged belly moving, as she relives trauma, the searing and bruising of delicate skin, her imprisonment and fear. It is not loss of control, but none whatsoever, soiling herself in the heat and a deep, abiding shame as diarrhea swills between her legs, rises beneath her belly, and fills a crate she's been stuffed into. Filthy, twisted rags have been pulled tight over her head, impossible to move, bloated, disgusting. All she can do is hate herself. al-Khanazir remembers everything, her kidnapping and containment, each quivering turn in the road, the jolt of the rickety pickup truck grinding to a halt, followed by the wheezing, inky exhaust of an uncooperative engine. Erratic stops make up the first leg of the journey as larger pieces of recyclable electrical waste are summarily dispatched before the truck moves on. As the stench of her beloved Zabaleen recedes, she leaves behind an extended family fattened by Cairo's mega waste, from the raw, the skins and seeds of tropical fruits, to cooked leftovers of grains and pastas made with a baharat medley of cloves and cardamom pods, coriander seeds, cinnamon, black pepper, smoked paprika, nutmeg, and cumin. The lack of smell tells her of lessening human habitation as she and the truck trundle southward. She is utterly alone, the only one of her kind for miles around, a novel experience for a young sow who has spent every waking moment running in a pack of inquisitive pigs. Without warning, another stop in a way station reeking of diesel, rancid old falafel, and human piss. A rapid changeover of vehicles takes place, squeezed this time on the floor of a speeding station wagon. Hidden beneath heavy boxes and overfilled bags, she feels the ground taking off all around her like a sickening G-force. Half curses and unfinished sentences uttered by the man who stole her drift towards the back and get lost in the road's thunder, sounds that might as well be coming from the moon. She loses track of time. After hours of forever and stationary again, at last, she is extracted from the crate. Her hood is wrenched free, and an entire bottle of water is shoved down her throat. Coughing, choking, and dry heaving, she nearly drowns. Shitting herself, she manages to break free and crawls as far as her shackles allow before passing out. When she comes to, she is starving, unable to move inside the crate. At another rest stop, guttural Arabic burst through an open window like a knife, a reminder of a bad end drawing near. No matter her agony, bribes are taken, a forward route plan, there will be no going back. Ear-splitting music from Radio Tel Aviv beats in her brain until a dial is flicked, and classical quarter notes of infinite sadness fill the air. The prisoner is transported to a kinder, gentler time when a woman singing melancholy love songs fed food sifted from trash to the beasts in her care. On one occasion, she's left behind. There is business that doesn't involve her, and she is tied to a pen of camels, cousins of sorts, due to an evolutionary glitch. Both are even-toed ungulates, but here the similarity between them ends. Pigs are naturally empathetic, while camels, resentful of their long-standing servitude to man, barely acknowledge each other, let alone a poor relation in their midst. Their disdain only confirms her own feelings of inferiority, enforced by a watery gruel left beyond her reach, no matter how hard she strains at her ropes. Sweltering sun barbecues tender flesh behind her ears. Dehydration makes the steps she is still able to take slow and deathlike. When the driver returns and finds her gasping, he scolds the camel keepers for their ineptitude. With bottled water, he pours a puddle so she can wash herself, and when she doesn't move to do so, he wets a rag and pats the blisters on her skin. Afterwards, he applies sunblock to the most affected parts. After being mistreated for so long, she can no longer tell if the hand of the abuser offers salvation or is just pretending to. Either way, they have reached an understanding. She struggles no longer when rags are secured around her head and she is folded like a pillow back inside the crate. In the dark, beyond the watchtowers, a floating bridge has been surreptitiously erected, one from a raft and ropes that will be dismantled before first light. Money always exchanges hands. Crossing the Jordan River, her handler has been informed, should never be hurried. Noise travels far in the dead of night. After the cargo is secured, her crate is separated from the rest, its top prized off. Head free, she is encouraged to look around. It won't be long now, her torturer promises. As the raft, pulled by the ropes, glides across water, she nearly starts to cry. The ordeals of time and changes to her body have taken their toll. Along the way, she doubted whether she and her children would ever find a home, yet despite all that has been done to her and to them, inexplicably, she feels they may be getting closer to one. She can almost taste it in the sweet grasses along the banks and in the swell of the current. The man by her side is quiet and watchful as she is. Together, they share a moment of essential timelessness under the stars. She had forgotten of their existence. When she wakes, she feels rested and at peace.
Thanks. That's a really devastating passage. It's pig rendition.
Yes, that's what it is, yes.
And I think it comes as a real shock when you're reading the book. It kind of comes at you. And I found myself when I first read the novel that I cried. And I don't know if a novel has ever made me cry before. It is such a shock. And it recurs through the book that she has these interior monologues. And even though you've created this very engaging cast of characters, there is no one more engaging than the pig. And I'm wondering, is that what you intended?
No, it's not. I didn't really, and it's really funny, you know, like me writing fiction, well, my characters don't really like to talk to each other. Actually, I would prefer to write about people that don't want to talk to each other, because that's my whole experience kind of has been that the people who you need them to say the most important things, they don't say it. So for until I was done with the novel, the pig didn't have consciousness. And it was really at the end that I felt that I'm talking about torture and rendition all along, because of the military past of one of the main male characters and the other main male character, his involvement with history and black marketeering. So the issues today that are taking place in the Middle East, or at the time that I was writing, rendition, torture, people being picked up and thrown somehow into jail, waterboarding. My characters were talking about that, but in my novel, I had no one who was really experiencing that. And to talk about these issues from a distance is not really right. So all along, the pig, terrible advantage was going to be taken of the pig, because that's what happens to pigs in literature. But I wanted to have that experience within the pig's experience.
But also, you know, the novel is, all the way through the novel, there are discussions about history and politics. The characters are making comments and having conversations about this moment, you know, the Arab awakening that failed, the situation of women, the fact that the women in the town are still living in a very, very conservative culture, and how difficult it is to break out. And so she also, the pig also, she's captive. She has no freedom. The book is so much about the kind of confines and limitations of history and where the Arab nations now find themselves, that she becomes this kind of symbol of a lack of freedom, really, doesn't she?
She becomes a symbol of lack of freedom, but I think that's what happens under a patriarchy, and one that's as fierce as it is in the Middle East, is that nobody's valued. The men aren't valued, the women aren't valued, the children aren't valued, the pigs are definitely not valued. So under this heavy patriarchy or totalitarian regime, whatever you want to call it, and whatever excuses you want to make for it, no one is valued. So I think that's why that's the symbolism or the allegory.
So it is quite a bleak outlook in your book, in your novel. I mean, that there's huge comedy there. You've created this black marketeer who in the family who's basically profited from war, and he basically, going as far back as the beginning of the Arab-Israeli conflict, he's been making money out of war. And he's a great comic character. There's comedy around the pig as well.
There's comedy around the muhabarat. I mean, There's comedy, yeah. Because when you look at these things, I think in the region, if you don't have a keen sense of black humor, you're just going to faint and die.
Absolutely. So there's these great comic scenes, but underneath it, in all the sort of comments and thinking, there's quite a bleak perspective.
There is a bleak perspective there. However, and I was sort of thinking about that because when you were talking, you talked a little bit about it before, but there is also a great strength that against this backdrop of horribleness, people still make their day. They get up, they do their work, they love who they love, and they continue on. And there's a life force, and I think that's what I'm trying to suggest, even though it's through the pigs. There is a life force that continues, that's very compelling and should not be dismissed. As bad as things get, there's still agency on the part of the people there to figure out and to move through and to change. And I think that, with the black humor and the animals, and I'm hoping that that's not lost.
No, I don't want to spoil the ending. There's a very wonderful cinematic ending that does exactly what you say, which is this kind of moment of liberation and life, isn't it? So it does have this wonderful, rather joyous ending. And there is something I'm also very intrigued by, that you go into fantastically gruesome detail about making of sausages and machinery and slaughter, and you are a vegetarian.
Yes, I
And
am.
When I was reading it,
But I'm a vegetarian, but my dad slaughtered lambs in the garage in Akron, Ohio. And my uncles did too. And, like any young girl or boy, I had to blow into the trachea to see if the lungs inflated. Meat is such an interesting, even though I'm a vegetarian, meat is such an interesting issue to write about.
Right. And I think for carnivores, it's going to be quite a hard read. So
Shouldn't be.
Well, I found it. I mean, it is. The detail's fascinating.
That's because carnivores don't know where the meat comes
Well, exactly. We're in denial, so we are. We've got like 4 minutes, so if yes. Do we? I don't know if we've got a microphone.
I can just speak.
Okay.
Thank you, and I resonate a lot with what you said. I'm also Jordanian and have had this new coming renaissance of Arabness and where do I fit in. But I wanted to ask you, and I don't know if you've heard about the recent new Netflix series in Jordan. Someone from your family, extended tribe, was a young female who was on screen kissing a man, and that has created such an uproar in just society.
From our tribe?
From your tribe.
Oh, right.
And I think it's just brought a lot of conversation about this schism in the current Jordanian society and this blindness of the majority to the existence of this minority that has this life and maybe some mentality and etc. So my question for you is, as we reconcile ourselves, our Arabness, with the modern faith, the new face of the Middle East, and just fight to create our space for women and for young people who are liberal and fighting for equality and diversity. How do we do that in a way without fostering the schism and maintaining the communication instead of alienating the majority or the mainstream that still exists?
That's a hard question. And I think we all have to go back to what work we want to do and how we approach that work. This Mother of All Pigs is fiction, kind of, not really completely, but fictionalized family memoir, because my uncle, when he came out of the army, he did try to raise pigs in Jordan. So, and I was worried that the pig would be an animal of controversy, in terms. But I think that you have to be true to what your creative work, and the process of working on something is that you work on it, and you shouldn't be thinking about how others will receive it. It's your work. That's the really important thing that all of us have to grapple with as writers, artists, journalists. It's our work. So we can decide our parameters, really. But I think the Middle East, there's an idea that somehow these minorities are separated out and that Islam is over there. That's just so against my family experience, is that the Middle East has been always together. The history, the culture is interwoven. And my father will claim many medieval Islamic philosophers and scientists as his own. He doesn't see himself different. Religion has never really divided in our family, from the culture. And I think that the Middle East, too, now has to really see about seeing itself holistically and not as just bits here or there. Because that's what gives it the rich culture and philosophy and art and science.
We're going to have to stop there, I'm afraid. Malu, thank you very much. Thanks to all of you. Malu's novel is on sale outside. She will sign copies too. I do encourage you to read it if you haven't read it already. Thanks very much. Thank you, Malu.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you. Thank you. They went really